Hi, I'm Libby Ingracia, and welcome to another episode of the IBM Champions Chat. I am the program director for the IBM Champions program. IBM Champions are the top external experts and advocates on IBM's programs, products, and offerings. And we work together with them to reward their activity, thank them for the work that they do in the community to support all of the rest of the community, and help them do even better and more significant work. So we're so grateful today to have a couple of our IBM champions and IBM Fellow Sridhar Muppidi here with us today. And they're going to be talking about governance and identity management. But before that, I want to remind everybody that the IBM Champions program accepts nominations once per year, and this is that nomination period. So if you visit our website at ibm.com/champion, you'll be able to nominate yourself or someone else to join the IBM Champions program. So welcome to our IBM Champions chat today, and let's bring in our speakers and give them a chance to introduce themselves to you. Hi, Vinita. Hi, Sylvain. It's good to see you. Vinita, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to our audience and let them know how you feel about being an IBM champion. Mute still, Vinita.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Libby. Thank you, Sridhar. Thank you, Sylvain. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I've been an IBM champion for just a year, but it's been a good journey. It's been very interesting. And thank you again for the opportunities and all the fun times we've had together. So let me talk a little bit about what I do. I'm Vinita Bhushan. I'm with Pontus Research, and I've been an enterprise architect in the identity and access management space for a long time. I've worked with all of the IBM Security Verify Access suite in all its incarnations. So my team and I have done a lot of that sort of work. But really today, what we're going to focus on is, I think, strategy, planning, and the importance of thinking through what you want before you go out and roll out, your solutions. So I hope you have a lot of questions. I look forward to talking to all of you, and thank you again.
Thanks so much, Vinita. Sylvain?
Hi, my name is Sylvain Gilbert. I'm working for Intact Financial Corporation. I started my career in software research and development, and then I transitioned to IT. So for the past 15 years, I've been doing architecture and design of infrastructure foundation for numerous middlewares, including leading industry tool in the identity and access management domain. So we can say that I made my way up in IAM from the bottom up. In recent years, my role has evolved more into product owner for access management solution at Intact. I still love to have my hands in code and Git. Some of my contributions are found online in various IBM security open source automation initiative on GitHub, and some participation in the IBM Security Verified user community. And my general interest nowadays is the study of how DevOps practices and culture influences and or reshape the IAM practitioner's role. As an IBM program champion, it allowed me so far to gain insight and support from other industry experts, and this allows me to continue to drive our own program with confidence.
Well, I'm so glad to have you both as IBM champions and to have you here today for our conversation. So next, let me bring in our sort of conversation host, IBM VP and CTO for Security and an IBM Fellow, Sridhar Muppidi. Sridhar, hi, glad to have you today.
Thank you, Libby, and thank you so much, Sylvain and Vinita, for joining us today. In addition to being IBM champions, I'm also pleased to see, Vinita, you're championing the IAM program for many years. And Sylvain, I see you're championing the developer community, which is really good. So for the audience, I think we can start to broaden our questions to help the expertise as well. As Libby said, I drive the technical architecture, innovation, and strategy for the IBM Security Division, but I grew up in the identity management space. I'm very passionate about the topic. I can definitely try to keep up with these two fine experts here on the call.
Thank you so much, Sridhar. Now I'm going to turn the conversation primarily over to the three of you.
Okay, so again, thank you everybody for joining again one more time. What we're going to do today is make it a little bit of a conversation based on a specific topic and a theme. And as you have questions, feel free to put them on in the chat over here so that we are able to see those and work them in as we have this dialogue as well, as opposed to coming back towards the end and trying to set up the context. So with that in mind, I want to get us started with the current pandemic in a global situation, right, which is common to all of us. And sitting in the security division, good or bad, we see a lot of threats, right? Close to 6,000% increase in cybersecurity threats, focused on predominantly most of us working from home, whether working from home as an employee or as a consumer. There's a lot of us who are not used to working at home, are working from home, or our consumers are working from home. And we see a lot of spear phishing attacks, a lot of different types of attacks to be able to leverage those not so strong policies at home. So with that in mind, what we have seen across our client base is focus on the identity and access management program to support these remote employees, remote workforce, right? Not just employees, but contractors and partners. Workforce is a broader term, as well as dealing with some of the growing threats for consumers. So I want to get started with Sylvain, yourself, right? You and your organizations have done a fabulous job in pivoting to these new sort of requirements. Can you share how your organization was able to adapt to the COVID situation?
Yes, thanks. At Intact, I can say we have a mature IAM program running for many years. It's been evolving a lot, and I don't think we can say it's always it's a story that ended. I think it's always evolving. But for many years ago, I recall some discussion about preparing, enabling Intact for a pandemic plan, and that all seemed at the time very hypothetical. But what happened this year, of course, everybody knows. So in March, Intact, we decided, also under public regulation that were issued, is all worker basically were about 12,000 employees. So all worker had to work from home suddenly. So we had to enable thousands of staff for teleworking who were not enabled for that in a very short time, within weeks. So that, of course, can put a lot of pressure on delivering laptops or enabling VPN access or VDI, virtual desktop solution. But building on our mature IAM program and tools, we were able to deliver those accesses I could say, within weeks, which is for that amount of user was, I think, fantastic. And as a lesson learned, I think it's very good to include IAM in any pandemic response plans or business continuity plans. And in this case, I think that a good IAM program is critical for the business into allowing them to rapidly turn around things and in an agile way.
Yeah, I think that's a very impressive story, Sylvain. I've worked with a number of clients, and most of them have not been able to pivot that quickly as you have, right? So that shows the maturity of the program. Now, Vinita, you have the experience and fortunate to work with a large number of clients across different industries, right? Financial and non-financial. So have you seen any patterns, right? I think one pattern that Sylvain was talking about is to enable the remote workforce very quickly through the set of VPNs and other things that we have to talk about. So can you share some patterns and best practices that you have seen and engaged or deployed?
Yeah, so, Sylvain talked about a very interesting thing. He talked about preparing and putting IAM in your pandemic planning. But there's more to it, right? So I'll talk about a specific use case, the largest department of education in our country. They were a customer of ours, and we had rolled out and upgraded their identity and access management solution. When we were doing that, I noticed that all of their students, and they had over 1 million students, were being handled completely separate of the centralized identity solution. So the centralized identity solution did their administrators and their staff and so on, but they had these separate feeds and a whole separate legacy set of solutions for students. So we went to, my team and I went to the management and I said, why don't we take all these students and bring them into the centralized identity system? At the time, it was not, it was sort of 50-50, maybe why do we need to do this, a lot of load, et cetera, but we did. And when they were told within a weekend, they had to get these 1 million students enabled to work online over a weekend, do you know how much it helped that they were already in the centralized system? So then we just had to sort of provision their assets. So sometimes it's adding IAM to a pandemic plan, but it's also planning your IAM solution so it's extensible. So it doesn't, fall flat when you suddenly change things. So that's one example, I think, which is really spot on of how pre-planning helped in this case. And it wasn't specifically thinking of a pandemic, it was just making it so students also came into your centralized system. So that was one example. And there was another where I think I want to share this because, Sridhar, it really fits in with what you're asking, right? A bank. We rolled out an IGA solution, a governance solution, worked beautifully. And then they came up with a very interesting use case. They said, we have all these people we're hiring during the pandemic. We don't have a chance to talk to them, to give them laptops, to have a conversation about security awareness. We want them to be set up so that when they sign their agreement and they are kind of pre-hired, we want that use case to be added into your governance solution. So they get provisioned with everything they need upfront. So on the day they get hired, we actually just replace their candidate ID with their employee ID. But now you've got this whole setup so they can come in day one, have an orientation for about 3-4 hours, not really worry about their accesses. They've already been set up in the pre-hire phase, and it works brilliantly. I hadn't thought of that as a use case, but it worked out again. The planning was such, we built it on transaction workflows, so adding pre-hire was just straightforward. So again, planning and adding, pandemic planning in and adding IAM to pandemic planning, both of those are things you've got to think about. Because you never know what's going to come. It's all unpredictable.
Yeah, right? I think the current pandemic is just an example of what else could be there. Now, I think you talk about pre-provisioning, which is really cool idea. Is there a deprovisioning as well that we should be thinking about? Because you want to leave your trail.
Yeah. Pre-provisioning was a great idea, new hire. And the first thing we talked to them about was, what if the person decides on day X before they were supposed to start that, I'm not really doing this. So we had to build a pre-hire termination process to match the pre-hire onboarding process.
Got it.
So again, we had both of those. Yeah.
And Sylvain, you had a comment over here?
Yes. going back at the COVID-19 story, sometimes you think of an IAM program as, you model RBAC roles, and these are kind of static. And once provision, well, your user have the access that they need, and that's it. And you move on to something else. But in this case, really, what we wanted from the program was agility. So suddenly you have calls at your claims insurance claims the department dropping because people are no longer driving and are no longer reporting claims, and you have people calling for getting rebates and discount for the COVID. So what we needed to do was somehow rapidly enable those claims worker and reprovision them to have access to permissions to provide claims. So they were helping their co-workers and in other line of businesses. And when that surge of calls ended, then it's back to business as usual. Well, what do you do with these temporary permission that you granted? You still need to manage them and revert them back. So without a mature and agile IAM program, it's difficult. It would have been difficult for us to do that while remaining compliant with our roles and access policies.
Right.
So this is an area where, again, your IAM program can benefit and help the business achieve responses that it never thought it would need to accomplish.
Got it. No, thank you, both of you. So I think both of you talk about being agile and being able to expect some of these situations where you're expected to do things out of the ordinary very quickly. Panda being just an example of that. Provisioning, deprovisioning. Vinita, you're talking about some creative ways of getting ahead of the problem, right? That's what you're talking about here. I think all of this sounds really good, but it also seems to indicate there's a lot of workforce necessary to do this, right? Like people. But the reality is a lot of us are dealing with a lot of challenges, right? Keeping up the lights on the current, trying to modernize, and we don't have enough people, right, in general. So either, right, like Sylvain, you're talking about how do we increase the automation, which I think is the right answer, one of the examples of helping with the situation. But also we need to think about leveraging the current people, process, and technology in place to help advance the IAM program as well, right? I know, Vinita, you've been doing some work with ServiceNow as an example, right, of leveraging that people, process, and technology. Can you talk about, how, and more than how, so why did you have to do that? What specific scenarios and how you're accomplishing that, and the value that your clients are getting?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sridhar. So I think one of the critical things we noticed early on, and this is about 3-4 years ago actually, is people interact best if they recognize the interface, right? And governance, yes, you want to give them roles, you want to make sure their accesses are certified, but when they have to go in and request an access, when you ask them, typically, if you want to request a laptop or you want to report a problem, you use your service management interface, right? Maybe ServiceNow, whatever it is. It used to be Remedy, whatever. So you go there and that's where you do this. But suddenly when you come to accesses and application accesses, you're telling them go to this identity governance solution. They've got to manage 2 different interfaces, not to mention the fact they often don't know what role they're asking for, right? It's easy for them to say, I want a laptop. It's easy for them to say, I don't know, this is not working. So what we did was, as a team, we started talking to our clients and we saw a lot of interest in taking what is their service management interface and letting people use that same interface to request things around identity governance, like an access, or for managers to say, aha, means I have an access certification due. So you put something like ServiceNow in front of it, so they use the same interface they use for everything else. But in the back end, your clever provisioning is done by your governance and identity solution. So this picked up, steam, and we noticed that the governance vendors, including IBM, is looking at, all of the vendors are looking at putting a sort of a governance plugin into, say, ServiceNow or the ticketing systems. And we've been working with customers to actually incorporate that, because it's not as easy as it sounds. It's not just the plugin. Again, it's not just the technology. It's understanding the processes. So two completely different teams, your IAM team and your ServiceNow team, can work together, but increase efficiencies. The whole goal is increasing efficiency, Sridhar, and making people aware that now they need less support, because the solution people understand, so they call help desk a lot less because they know how to do this. And second of all, from your support perspective, your IGA people or your governance people are not so hung up on the user interface aspects of it. They can focus on the true things around compliance and regulation. Does that make sense? That's what we were going for, and that's why it's picked up, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think you're talking about from a scenario perspective. I think the impetus is clear to me, right? So from an IAM and governance scenarios, that basically means you can start with, an interface like ServiceNow or something similar to create an access request that would then go into the engine for governance and then fulfill that.
Exactly.
At the same time, you can flank it on the other side by saying, hey, you may have an interface already for doing an automation task, like Sylvain, what you do with Ansible, right? To be able to take a task of provisioning and go do something in a system that may not have a provisioning interface.
Yes, I would like to just to complement on what Vinita explained. I understand the topic of having multiple interfaces for the business or business user. For instance, if you have HR people or that are having their own HR system and it's not well connected to the YAM platform, then they might be reluctant to learn the interface of the YAM platform. So when that happens, it takes time for your provisioning and deprovisioning and whatever other processes are required. So I can see also another trend is that, well, try to connect the business user like HR to the tool that they're already using, and have the YAM platform listen for events from HR system, and so this way you're reducing the friction. The HR people remain on their platform, and they're more maybe willing to contribute to the aspect of IAM. And you reduce friction, and the accesses are provision or deprovision more rapidly without looking for them like tedious IS or IT task. But the other main topic I want to transition into is, like our organization. I mean, like a lot of many organizations are adopting agile and DevOps processes and culture over many years. Feel somehow maybe that IAM should not be left on the side of the road. Young practitioners should not let that happen, and instead they can lead their own culture change and transformation, and that's for the benefit of the entire organization. Many years ago, sometimes you could have a cycle where you would deploy a new connector, a new identity connector, and it would take 2-3 months, and that was deemed okay. But nowadays, that cycling, that duration is often too long to be aligned with the business unit more and more working with more shorter duration and well-defined sprints. So I think it doesn't mean for the young people to work harder or to deliver faster. I think it means for them to break things apart, agile, and adopt a bit of agile mentality, where instead of when you have to build a new connector to a new identity source, instead of building it with full CRUD feature, why not adopt the cadence or the pace of the business and have a first sprint where you just provide read-only capability and deliver that to the user. Don't keep it to yourself. Provide visibility so you can gain feedback from the user faster. And the end user can already have insight faster than they would if they would need to wait 3 weeks for the full-blown connector. And then in the second sprint, maybe you provide the add account or access capability, and maybe you want to end with another last sprint where you complement on the remaining CRUD capabilities. So the idea for me of development and IAM is that they are sprint, but these are not a race, and the cadence that you set in your IAM program should be sustainable by all. So it's not a race; it's really a marathon. And yeah, you need to start somewhere, but you need to start that journey to be better aligned with the timeline of the business nowadays.
But coming back to the question about people, process, and technology, Sylvain, I think what you're hitting on is a couple of key things, right? One is there's the design and planning stage before you even hit this, and you're talking about optimizing there, which I think is a really good point. And then Vinita, you're talking about the process optimization, right? In terms of how you do that. And then Sylvain, you're talking about not just the agility, but also the continuous integration, CICD and DevOps, right?
Yeah.
As you think about one additional thing that I could add to this conversation is also the deployment, the choice of deployment, right? Choice of deployment in terms of these days, identity and access management is a fairly mature sort of technology, right? It's a lot of it has to do with the process around it. How do you ensure that you have the right user accessing the right set of applications at the right time and putting the conditions and all that? So optimizing the operations cost is another one that I would encourage as well to help with the automation, right? Like things like hybrid cloud, right? So how do you do DevOps method for not just your applications, but also managing your IAM program, right? So how do you do monitoring? How do you ensure automatic onboarding of applications? How do you ensure that you have enabled and empower your developers to go set up your own application integration? How do you ensure and enable your line of business owner do the certification that is usually going to the central places, right? These are some of the things that we see as optimizations on the operations side to help with that.
Let me say something here, Sridhar, because this is an interesting topic you're bringing up, right? On the one hand, you say IAM is mature, but think about it. Maturity is from what we understand to be the problem, which is our internal employees, they sign contracts, we know. The whole concept of consumer IAM is the priority with the business, right? So the business is telling us, go off and get us a consumer IAM solution. We are saying we're getting our connectors on faster. So we've got to recognize that. And that's the tug and pull that IAM people are facing today. The business is requesting priorities which don't really meld with our priorities because we're getting these agile thingies and all of this going faster, but they're saying, get my consumers on. And we're saying, hang on, that's a new area, we'll get to it. So we've got to learn to play that balancing act. That is where the struggle is. It's not so much on how do we do this. We all know what we need to do, but we need to prioritize and recognize the business is our driver here. That's very important. I mean, I feel this all the time, so that's why I'm bringing this up. It's my soapbox, okay? Sorry.
Yeah. No. I think both of you saying this, all of us saying the same thing, right? I think what Sylvain is saying is start small and grow, right? Don't just boil the ocean, right? I think what you're saying is, listen to your clients, leverage their existing tools as opposed to building new tools. And what I'm trying to say is like leverage the existing operational efficiencies as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel, right? From that perspective, running a service is something which is understood, right? Running a service and a program is where I think we need help in terms of prioritization.
It is a program, and we've got to understand consumer IAM is as critical as IAM. So getting one part of it right doesn't mean we've got all of it.
Now, there was a question from the chat, right, which may be pertinent, not necessarily in the consumer side, but it's applicable, right, in where there's a question around what's the best practice around designing ACLs, right, for users and sub-users and things like that, right? When you look at like a mundane task like this, and we're talking about agile and DevOps and CICD, what any guidance over there, Vinita?
So what it is before you even get to the ACL, what are you trying to do? You're trying to figure out at a high level who has access to what. So really take a step back. Don't think of it as an ACL. Think about it as who is your subject and what do you want to give them access to? And then look at the risk of somebody who's not supposed to get this getting access, right? So break it down into multiple problem parts. There's the part of who should have access so they can get their job done. There's the part of who should not have access because this is high risk. Put all of that in place and then come down with a simple, because there's the whole argument when I started, right? Deny all and then start allowing access where required. We were extremely unpopular with our deny all philosophy, right? Or in ISAM, you put it right at the top, you had the root ACL which said nobody has access to anything. Guess what? It always caused a problem. So then we started getting more pragmatic and saying who really needs access. So you've got to sit down, understand what your permissions are going to be, who needs access, why they need that access, and what the risk is of exposure. Come up with a pragmatic process, and then put that into an ACL. The ACL is the last part of it, and it is by then you shouldn't even have to think. It should be very clearly defined.
And then Sylvain, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think also you're business owner of every application in an organization need to have a properly identified business owner. And they need to provide you also the guidance on exactly. Some of that for the proper designing of, but sometimes the access is so broad that maybe you want to define like an IT member type of policy. If you're in IT, well, automatically you get that app granted as opposed to do a fine-grained ACL for each app. But one thing I would not recommend is letting an app being accessed by all authenticated user, because you never know when you grow and with acquisition, and then you have your access management being accessed by a lot more people than you envision first from different connectivity requirement. Then if you put too much of those, well, grant access to anyone not authenticated, then it can get you into trouble. So we always tend to put an ACL on every application, whether it being very fine-grained or very coarse-grained, but always have an ACL on any application.
Gotcha. So I think one innovation that we've done that may be pertinent over here is, as we're looking at the modernized IAM from a offering perspective, right? As we started looking at Verify SaaS, the traditional model of having a centralized ACL model makes everybody go through a central team to define those ACLs and permissions and all that, right? And they're trying to understand what is the business really trying to do. Mm-hmm. And hence it becomes really complex because the team does not probably understand the entire complexity of the business. Hence it gets into really messy ACLs where you may have a butcher in Atlanta and a butcher in Florida, Miami. They may be doing exactly the same role and you'll have two different roles. Instead, it's the same role of a butcher, but the location is different, right? So what we did was, we basically delegated, the service is still centralized, but we delegated the administration of the ACLs and the permissions to the line of business because they know it the best, right? They know it the best, so that you can then create, Sylvain, to your point, set up an application integration with single sign-on at the same time. And at the same token, create a mechanism for the line of business to define those ACLs and define those roles, define in a mechanism that a line of business can then certify for which user needs to have access and keep that ongoing certification so that it's not on some one person's job per se, right?
But then your UI that
Yeah.
enables them to do that has to be so user-friendly, because
Exactly.
that is not an IT person. That's a business owner of your butcher app, right? And
Exactly.
they don't really care how this is supposed to work and it's an ACL. So you've got to make your UI, coming back to my whole story of you need to give them an interface that they are familiar with and understand. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. And I decouple the engine, which is allows you to do the delegation. And for sure, being able to leverage design principles and making sure that the clients are looking at something more user friendly for their business application versus the 20,000
Right.
elements that we show, right? Or use the same engine with the APIs talking to something like ServiceNow, where they may be familiar with that interface, as you said, and then make the request from there, right? That may be another, and approve from there. So,
Yep.
no, I think that's good, and thank you for the question, and hope we answered that. And just to wrap this part up, Sylvain, can we go back to that CICD? And I have a comment as well, in terms of the IAM, because I want to tie it back to my original question of continuous delivery of IAM versus having one big aha moment of IAM, right? Instead, how do you integrate that with DevOps and CICD?
Well, at first, it was all about automation for us, and we thought, I think we're doing DevOps, but we're not really that aware what DevOps really meant. So we had these bunch of, we took the opportunity when we modernized our platform to start fresh, restandardize every object, artifact, and build fresh as a newer implementation, which happened to have a rich REST API management capability. So we try to do automation for the last 10 years with a bunch of script, but not well organized and difficult to maintain and not versioned. But so I think at that point, instead of designing something with a vision of 2-3 years, yes, you need that vision. But what we try to do is, okay, let's build something now that we can use and evolve it and learn. Let's become a learning organization, in the sense that we will discover new technology we've not used before, Git, and other pipeline tools, and we're going to learn what they can benefit to us. And in the end, we had a powerful set of automation scripts that we could use to build our entire access management stack, and to deploy all our ACLs and POP and Junction SSO solution, all automated. Everything. I think the key thing to start with is with continuous integration. You need centralized code management, or it could be like Git, but you need to have everything there. That's the first step you need to consider. Instead of having artifacts save a bit in every location. I mean, now we have a centralized SCM where we have server configs, capacity management for all server, ACL, POC. Everything is inside this SCM. And then the next part that may be harder is, well, you have all these scripts, these automation scripts that you trigger manually. Now you want to make them more continuously deliver or deploy. So so you don't achieve that maybe in your first 6 months or first year, but you start slowly, small, and you grow. So now, for instance, we're trying soon to have all our provisioning automation being triggered daily. So, and what is the impact on our IAM practitioner is that we want them to spend less time in management console and more time in Git and defining solutions in Git, and be able to have more time to deploy and design innovative solution than doing management of the actual artifact deployment. So Moving to continuous delivery, that may be another part, but it's feasible as long as you take it one step at a time. And one other thing that is important is collecting insight. So as you grow, suddenly you have, oh, I have a delivery pipeline. It has so many manual steps here and there. And you select which of those manual steps you want to get rid of and make them automated. You can measure now your cycle time. How long does it take me to deploy my YAM artifact and non-prod or prod? And in each iteration or sprint, you monitor the time that you took, and then it feeds back into maybe designing or refining your new pipeline for the next iteration. So for us,
Yeah.
achieving DevOps, it's not like something we achieved in a couple months, and I don't consider we have achieved that DevOps journey yet. For us, it's a journey, but I think we're adopting somehow agile techniques like backlogs. So it's important not to lose sight of the business requirement. Yes, you're becoming more agile and DevOps, and you deploy faster. So what we do as product owner, I always try that every of our sprint has a good balance of optimizations of either the pipeline or the user interface or the user experience, and optimizing and also bringing innovation. So so you cannot you cannot forget the vision for the business. Maybe at the beginning you'll have sprints that are more influenced by you're building your DevOps pipeline, and eventually you gain more maturity. And in your sprint, you're going to build more of some innovation stories. But you need to start somewhere, and you
Yeah.
don't need to worry about, is this really DevOps or not? You can read books on that, but you need to build your own experience, and from that, build some other build your vision where you want to go. I don't think there's a single road to go there, but you need to get there.
Yeah. No, I think this is great vision. I've seen a number of clients pivot over here where, you're using DevOps where developers are, assigned to a project and removed from project at a sprint level, right? So it's not just the going to the management console, as you said, but making it, dynamic enough to say, hey, these set of developers are working on this project on this sprint. We're using this CI/CD pipeline, and unprovision them and deprovision them for that time, and doing it all in an automated manner. Now, the one thing, Vinita, just a quick comment for you to chime in on is as we do this, privileged access becomes really important, right? You don't want to give the keys to the kingdom to different processes over there taking over control. Privileged access becomes important. We typically say that, hey, any processes need to be treated like an identity, and they need to have the appropriate scope and authentication and all that. Can you comment on, how our audience should be thinking about privileged access during this automation as well?
Absolutely, because I think ultimately that's where we come in from a security standpoint, right? We draw the line around what's critical, what's sensitive, and who should have access to it. Because the business is looking at getting a job done, right? From their perspective, that's what it is. It's our role as security consultants to make sure that people don't have more access, or the account does not have more access than it should. And if it does, it should be protected. So you've got to, but again, it's a fine balance, right? If you make it so restrictive and the rules are so terrible that people will just fall back and say this doesn't work, and security gets pushed back. We go low down the priority totem pole, right? Because the business says we need this. So it's, again, communication, working with the business, making sure that your processes have the security team involved right from the beginning, so you can say things which are reasonable. Again, it comes back to risk. It was my whole ACL story. Don't try and protect everything. Look at what's sensitive, what's risk prone, and then put in reasonable controls. If you do that and build a good relationship with the business, it becomes a win-win for all.
Got it.
I would say think about it, but don't make it so harsh that nobody can use it.
Yeah. So I think just to bring some closure to this part of the discussion, right? We talked about the role of the IAM getting to be more agile, right? We talked about the need for being agile in terms of the transformation projects you're doing, like DevOps and DevSecOps and other transformation projects. So we talked about how do we do process optimization. Sylvain, you talked about some of the planning that needs to go up there. I talked about operations optimization, which like a SaaS service, and Vinita, we were talking about privileged access. So I think we covered a lot of things over here. What I want to leave the audience is with some final thoughts, right? And in terms of both of you have seen. And if you've used the right choice of words to say, "Hey, IAM is a program, not a project," which is music to my ears, right? But how do you, inculcate some of that culture, right, as well as best practices to the audience? Can you comment on that, Sylvain? I'll give you a few minutes first.
Thanks. Well, there's two aspects to it. In your IAM program, you have IAM practitioners. And referring back to this discussion on CICD, and I think on any other IT organization adopting DevOps and CICD, your IAM practitioner role evolve from maybe provisioning manually configuration policies or artifact in your IAM tool. Instead, they become more developer of solution, and they design and they develop their solution and they model them and they save it in Git, and then the deployment goes and does the rest. So more and more we have seen in our team like the role of the ops. I wouldn't say not shrink, but becoming like the part that is so much optimized that we spend more time on the business request, the day-to-day, either the day-to-day business request or working on new innovative solutions. So I think YAM program and DevOps, the role of the YAM practitioner evolves. And I think it's a good thing because you work on more interesting stuff than just repeating and deploying in every environment manually, which is risky. So that's one aspect I wanted to bring.
Okay,
thank you, Sylvain. And Vinita, any?
So I'm going to pull this up 37,000 feet up. Right?
Okay.
It's one thing to say, yeah, we're going to do this in DevOps and Agile, and it's all really good stuff, Sylvain, because that's what I live and breathe too. But to get these programs to be meaningful, up at management, there's got to be some sort of key performance indicators, right? You've got to have KPIs, and you've got to be able to measure them. So in our company, what we did was we built a tool which takes the input based on what's been happening in your various projects, puts it together, and spits out almost like a heat map, which shows progress, and it's so obvious, right? It has red, yellow, green. So things, and so when your management looks at it, they're getting that 37,000 foot level view of how useful these programs are and what benefit they're bringing to the business. Because it's one thing for us to say we've made this really efficient, but we all know that to get funded and to go on, management has to see this, and it has to be in colors that make sense. So if things are turning green, then they start focusing on what's red and know that, okay, privileged access, I'm having a bit of a problem, I need to look at that. Or governance, certification. So you've got to have an assessment that pulls everything together and brings it up in terms of performance indicators which quantify benefits, right?
So you're talking about assessment. You're talking about assessment to make sure that you see what you get the visibility, then take the appropriate, put the controls and process in place, and then act on it through DevOps or CICD and other.
Correct, exactly. So it's like start at the top, show the value, and then keep going. So your program is measurable as opposed to be multitudinous projects all going off on their own trip.
Yeah. Each program will have a number of projects. For each project, define the priorities and ensure them.
I always say program, work streams, projects.
Project, okay.
Yeah.
So Sylvain, you had a quick comment, or?
Yes, I think a quick way of looking at this from the business perspective is when the IM team deployment gets unnoticed by the business. So if you end up with a DevOps pipeline that the business only perceive the meeting you've done with them to deploy the new innovative solution, and never the deployment of the solution to production seemed an issue. I think it's also good for the business because the only time that you spent was working on addressing the requirements. And so I think that's an important aspect. It's like an indirect aspect of it, but that's.
I think what you're saying is you can use automation and DevOps as a way to provide that key performance measurement to the key performance indicator. Is what you're saying,
and
right?
That's exactly. I think you've got to tie it all together. Because there's one aspect which is the business, and there's the other aspect which is optimized technical delivery, and this is the bridge that gets you there.
Got it. So I want to thank both of you. It's an honor and a pleasure to chat with experts like you guys. So thank you for the time, and for everybody, thank you so much for joining. Just to summarize, we talked about IAM as a program. I think Vinita was talking about program, workstream, and project, right? Which is a good mantra to remember, and how business is important, not just the technical part. But we also talk about being agile and having agility in the program to keep up with things like the current global pandemics. Being able to use innovation like pre-provisioning, as Vinita was talking about, or in Sylvain's case, he was talking about DevOps as a innovation to keep up with that agility, right? I think, but the key point is, how do you make IAM nimble? And the nimbleness does not come from a big program, but being able to define key outcomes and do something small, as Sylvain is saying, right? Get started tomorrow, right? And then mature over a period of time. The other part we also talked about was the need for listening to our clients, and more than clients, need for consumer experience, whether it's employees, whether it's consumers. IAM is always seen as a necessary thing versus, being a very frictionless experience, right? I think that's a key point that we were talking about. And the experience is not about UI, it's a UX, right? Which comes from process as well as, technology and leveraging existing tools and processes. Like Vinita was talking about ServiceNow integration, where you flank IAM with left side and right side and drive that. Being able to leverage, capabilities like SaaS offerings so that you can alleviate the need for operations overhead, especially if we don't have enough team members, and using APIs as a way to drive that, as Sylvain was talking about. Innovation continues across the team, right? Not just those two examples, but using analytics. You heard Vinita talk about risk, right? She talked about assessment. She talked about risk. That comes with analytics, right? To say, how do I know who is doing what so that I can then go and manage it? If you don't have that, I often ask the question, tell me who has access to what and what they have done with it. That's my first question of governance. And most people are not able to answer that. If we're able to get that, then it becomes easy to quantify risk and goes back to designing the ACLs, maintaining it, and then automating it would be really helpful. So I hope that was useful for everybody. And I don't see any questions on the chat, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach to any one of us. We are passionate, as you see, and we'd love to chat with you more. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, all three of you, for a great conversation and for answering the questions that did come through. We got a lot of folks on the various streams saying that they were interested in hearing your viewpoints on this. And so we'll make sure to connect them if there are questions going forward. And let me remind everybody that our IBM Champion nominations are open. If you believe you should be an IBM champion, or if you know an IBM champion or someone who ought to be, that's at ibm.com/champion. And we'll have another IBM Champions chat coming up in 2 weeks. Same bat time, same bat channel. And we'll see you then. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye, guys.